Subcommittee. And we will love you. It's optional. Yeah, and it was also frustrating. Very fun, yeah.
Good morning, and welcome to the good morning, Mr. Shimkus, and welcome to the Subcommittee on Energy and Environment. Consumers today spend more than $500 million a day on foreign oil. That is half of our trade deficit. Between 2001 and 2008, when gasoline increased from $1.46 to $3.27 a gallon, the average household's annual energy cost increased by almost $2,000, slightly more than the average tax cut provided during the same period. These gas dollars go straight to OPEC, and some of them wind up in the hands of terrorists. We have spent too long resisting efforts to reduce our dependence on oil. As Tom Friedman of the New York Times puts it, the price of oil and the path of freedom run in opposite directions. Some oil payments find their way to Iran to fund its nuclear program, and other payments help fund teachings that perpetuate hate against Americans. But until recently, we were on the path of ever-increasing oil dependence. As you can see from the red line, in 2007, the Department of Energy projected increased levels of oil consumption far into the future. These are based on the Bush administration's oil-friendly policies. And these numbers were actually put together by the Bush administration Department of Energy. With Democrats in control of Congress, we moved quickly to end this dangerous cycle, enacting the first mandated fuel economy provisions in 32 years, which was a huge first step. President Obama accelerated their implementation with a 35.5 mile per gallon standard by 2016. Combined with the Renewable Fuel Standard and the Recovery Act measures, you can see from the blue line that we have frozen our levels of oil consumption for the foreseeable future. Again, that number from the Energy Information Agency. But we can and we must do more. The EPA has modeled what is technologically possible from a range of clean energy policies like those in the Waxman-Markey bill. And you can see from the green line that we could save more than all of the oil we currently import from OPEC, as much as 4 or 7 million barrels per day more than we've already accomplished. That is the green line. So we must continue down the path to further reducing our oil dependence. The Waxman-Markey bill includes $20 billion and other measures to deploy plug-in hybrid and all-electric vehicles, and has other provisions to help save oil. Now, I am sure we will be told, no, you can't. It will cost too much. It can't be done. But let me remind you, the automobile industry delivered that very same message for nearly a decade. They said the technology didn't exist, that we'd all have to drive tiny little go-karts if we raise fuel economy standards, and that the industry would suffer. Meanwhile, other countries innovated. The U.S. bled manufacturing jobs. Some automakers closed facilities after facilities, in part because we didn't raise standards quickly enough for them to compete. A recent study found that by transitioning to electric vehicles, we could create 1.9 million new jobs by 2030 in the United States. We could improve our trade deficit by $127 billion per year, and the typical U.S. household would pocket almost $4,000 extra in gasoline saved and other benefits. But if we do not act, we will prevent a generation of Americans from competing in the largest economic growth opportunity of the 21st century. The 2 million new clean energy jobs that would be created in America under the Waxman-Markey bill will be unfortunately created overseas. And we will simply trade our dependence on foreign oil for dependence on Chinese solar panels, Korean batteries, and German wind turbines. To say that it can't be done, I say to those, look at the clean energy entrepreneurs like A123, A Better Place, and the scores of new entrepreneurial companies that have begun this process of reinventing energy technologies and who are proving that, yes, it can. By charting this new path towards an energy-independent future, we will one day be able to tell OPEC that we don't need their oil any more than we need their sand. That is what this hearing is all about. The Chair has completed his opening statement. We now turn to recognize the ranking minority member, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses here this morning, with a special welcome to Administrator Jackson. Ms. Jackson, we have many important issues before this subcommittee, and we would hope that this is not your last visit. We look forward to your testimony and interaction today. Before I begin, I'd like to submit for the record the June 2009 hearing testimony of Lion Oil. It's a small refiner with about 1,200 employees. It's located in Arkansas. And quoting from that testimony regarding the Waxman-Markey cap-and-trade legislation, which I would note is pretty much the same as the EPA regulations, will result in the shuttering of our refinery and the destruction of 1,200 jobs. Yes, shuttering domestic refineries will not reduce our dependence on foreign oil. It will kill American jobs while we import more refined oil products from countries with more lax environmental laws. EPA regulations that would result in the loss of domestic refineries would not extend to refineries in India, where we'll be importing gasoline at, frankly, higher prices. We can remember the $4 gasoline in the past. These policies could send it even higher. I agree that we must take action to reduce America's dependence on energy from unstable foreign governments and dictatorships. But we can do that by increasing domestic production of oil and natural gas, including recovering our vast oil shale reserves while promoting unconventional fuels such as coal-to-liquids technology. We need simply all of the above. We cannot enact or have EPA force costly job-killing climate change policy under the so-called umbrella of energy independence. I would agree that if we allow the EPA to take command and control of our economy, that our oil imports will in fact decrease. But do you know what else will decrease? American jobs. Raising the price of gasoline because of cap and trade by as much as perhaps 70 cents a gallon, 77 cents a gallon, will indeed reduce our consumption. We are seeing a trend to electrify the transportation sector, which I think is good. But electric cars have to plug into a base load power source. The EPA is fighting a war on coal, where we get over 50% of our power today. And I would be interested in hearing the administration's view on nuclear power, something that was not in cap and trade or, I believe, in the administrator's testimony this morning. It is a fact that EPA climate regulations or worldwide climate agreements thus far will not include China or India. As we suffer from double-digit unemployment, are we going to send simply more jobs abroad for no environmental benefit? Yet many in Congress and the administration continue to promote policies that will push gas and electricity prices even higher by foolishly blocking and creating disincentives for energy production here in North America. They've also taken ill-conceived steps to block our government from using homemade fuel derived from coal and oil from our nation's closest ally in northern neighbor Canada. The glaring consequence of no domestic energy production is greater dependence on foreign sources of energy, coupled with higher gasoline, oil, natural gas, and electricity prices. Our economy is in a tough time right now, and coming from Michigan, I know that firsthand just how difficult things are for the folks at home. Rising energy prices will only exacerbate the economic problems that we're facing, and by law, the EPA is prevented from taking economic considerations into account. I think that's wrong. Before I yield back, I would just like to raise another important issue with Administrator Jackson. Coal combustion waste, or coal ash. For 30 years, EPA has resisted subjecting CCW to federal hazardous waste management regulations. Doing so now, I believe, would have serious economic and environmental consequences. Coal ash has been regulated in accordance with varying requirements and programs established by the states. An unwarranted hazardous designation will eliminate the environmental benefits of reusing coal ash and only force greater disposal in landfills. Recycling the ash falls right in line with our new green era of responsibility. Both the Green Building Initiative and the U.S. Green Building Council encourage using fly ash in concrete or products that contain recycled materials in green buildings. That benefit would be lost if somehow we saw regulation. So I would hope that perhaps you might be able to comment on that. At this point, I yield back my balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. For the record, the Nuclear Energy Institute endorsed the Waxman-Markey bill. Let me turn and recognize the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The title for today's hearing is on clean energy policies that reduce our dependence on oil. Now, I think what we've seen in this country for decades is a view that we can't do anything about this problem. We're just dependent on foreign oil to sustain our way of life, and that's it. There's not much we can do about it. Maybe drill a little bit more in the United States to get more domestic oil, but you can't replace all that oil we're bringing in, so why try? And in fact, the policies that we saw in the first part of this decade were exactly what the Republican president wanted. He had a Republican Congress, and therefore President Bush got through energy policy, more than 95% of the policies he wanted. But what we accomplished in terms of dependence on foreign oil with regard to those policies, we were still on a trajectory to need more oil every year, year after year, for as far as we could project into the future. It seems now that each year the amount of oil we imported has been going up, up and up and up, and that makes us more vulnerable to our national security being compromised. Now, however, in the last few years, Congress reversed this course. In 2007 and 2008, the Energy Independence and Security Act was adopted, and it increased the CAFE standard, which meant that cars had to be more efficient in their use of gasoline. Beginning of last year, we passed the Recovery Act, and in that law, we invested in the technology and manufacturing capability to help bring in plug-in electric vehicles to market beginning this year. In that law, we helped state and local governments replace their buses, trucks, and work vehicles with natural gas-powered vehicles all the way from New York to Texas, from California to Maryland. So we have started to do things that have actually reduced our dependence on foreign oil. Today's hearing will explore some of the real actions we have taken already to cut our nation's dependence on this oil. And I want to welcome Administrator Lisa Jackson to the committee. She's going to testify regarding clean air energy policies that are being implemented by the EPA that are reducing our dependence on oil. Earlier this month, EPA finalized an historic rule establishing greenhouse gas tailpipe standards for cars and trucks. EPA has produced strong but workable standards for tailpipe emissions, harmonized with standards from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. These standards will cut our oil dependence by 1.8 billion barrels of oil. They will drive the development of new technology here in the U.S. and provide the U.S. auto industry with the certainty it desires. These standards do all this while saving American consumers $3,000 over the life of a vehicle. So what we have is a standard that's supported by the auto companies. and auto workers, states, and the environmentalists. They're all on board. These policies are already making a difference for our nation's future. For the first time in decades, the Energy Information Administration no longer projects that the U.S. need for oil will increase year after year. We now expect that the U.S. will not need any more oil in 2030 than it did in 27. This is a remarkable improvement for our energy security. There's still more work to do. Administrator Jackson will brief us on important new EPA study that reveals the dramatic oil savings that are technically feasible and can be achieved through new energy policies. But the good news is that as we begin to solve the seemingly intractable problems of oil dependence, we also make progress on another seemingly intractable problem, the dangerous increase in our carbon pollution. This is what we stand for: strong, pragmatic, and effective policies that face the threats to our country and find sensible ways to resolve them. These are not partisan issues. They shouldn't be looked at as partisan issues. But we did go down that partisan road in the early part of this decade, and that road took us to greater dependence and problems that we see as intractable, rather than problems that we're now looking at as problems that we can deal with, and we can, as a result, have a safer and more efficient and a better future for our environment as well as the economy of this nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm glad we're having this hearing today on clean energy policies that will reduce our dependence on oil. I'm pleased also that we have Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lisa Jackson with us this morning. And anytime we talk about dependence on oil, one of the innovative actions that we're trying to move to is electrification of our transportation system. And I want to talk about the importance of coal in meeting the electricity demands of our country. We know today that coal produces 52% of the electricity needs of this country. We know that the demand for electricity is going to increase dramatically over the next 20 years. And I have the clear impression that this administration and this EPA has a strong bias against coal. Now, why do I say that? Well, one, this endangerment finding that they're working on right now. We know, and EPA has admitted itself, has acknowledged that the finding, the endangerment finding, will cause job losses in the U.S., and I think that that represents a clear and present danger to our economy and all of our efforts to provide the conditions for job growth and prosperity. In addition to the endangerment finding, this EPA is limiting coal permits. This EPA is trying to designate coal ash as a hazardous material. This EPA, in my view, is trying to create as many obstacles as possible in using coal. And I can assure you that China is using more coal, India is using more coal, because they want to be competitive in the global marketplace. And we know that coal produces the least expensive electricity. Now, if we're going to provide additional incentives for solar power, wind power, I feel very strongly that those alternative sources are inefficient, too expensive, use too much land, and does not produce enough electricity and cannot produce enough electricity. And I would hope that this administration would spend more time, more money on helping us perfect carbon capture and sequestration. Dr. John House at MIT is one of the leaders in this regard. He's working diligently with others to do this, and I think our long-term viability and strength and strengthening our economy depends upon developing carbon capture and sequestration and continued use of coal. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, the chairman emeritus of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On foreign oil. Our efforts began with the Energy Independence and Security Act, which was dealt with in this very committee, and which continued with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act and the administration's coordinated approach to deal with vehicle emissions, and finally the administration's proposal for increased offshore drilling. After many years of predictions that our dependence on foreign oil would only create additional dependence on that oil, we are seeing a change in that trajectory. The news only gets better if we see the American Clean Energy and Security Act signed into law. I would like to take a moment to commend Administrator Jackson for her work leading to a single harmonized standard for greenhouse gas emissions and fuel efficiency for autos. Prior to this landmark agreement, our automakers faced a patchwork of standards that would have been very nearly impossible to meet. Now that we have a single national standard for model years 2012 to 2016, it is time to begin with the same approach for the post-2017 model years. The administration has been successful once, and I know that with effort they can do the same thing again. As much as I disagreed with the Supreme Court in the case of Massachusetts versus EPA, the decision, although erroneous, was made. EPA was required to move forward with their endangerment finding, and they've done so. That endangerment finding is the legal underpinning for a national standard for autos. The national standard is too important to our manufacturers and to our economy for us even to consider a resolution of disapproval. Of course, it's important that we note that the remarkable technologies are coming out of our automakers, whether we're talking about the Chevy Volt, the Ford Escape, and the Fusion. Advanced